this Thursday. My next guest, he's already on standby, and we'll patch him through in just a bit. Former government minister in the Commonwealth of Dominica, Mr. Athie Martin, will join me in just a minute as we wind down our coverage here of the 2022 general election, which has been deemed a sham election by opposition observers and opposition forces here on the Commonwealth. However, the result has been accepted by the Electoral Commission of Dominica. We're also seeing and hearing of congratulatory messages pouring in from across the Caribbean and elsewhere as well. St. Lucia's Prime Minister Philip Pierre has issued a letter congratulating Prime Minister Roosevelt Skerrit on his election victory. Mr. Martin will join me right now. I understand that he is available. Let's see. Good morning and warm welcome. Thanks for agreeing to join us, Mr. Martin.
Well, good morning, and sorry for the delay because of my inability to access the video part of your broadcast.
The technology sometimes works out like that, but we're very pleased that you're on. We know you bring a valuable resource to the platform. Let's start
happy to help.
Excellent. Let's start off with your assessment of the events of Tuesday, December the 6th. How did you see it unfold?
Well, frankly, the events of Tuesday were not the most significant as far as I am concerned, because it was quite predictable what was going to happen when once it was going to be possible to conduct a poll of a population of 70,000 against a list of twice that number of names. When once it was going to be possible to conduct a poll without any means of identifying, of certifying the identity of the electors beyond that person simply saying their name, because we still do not have voter identification cards. It was not significant really, because we still had the incumbent blocking access to the national radio station. It was not surprising because we still had no accountability at all for the millions that was spent. By their own admission. The Dominica Labour Party had indicated they would be spending $21 million on what was just concluded on Tuesday. So for me personally, the outcome in terms of what you might call a sham election was not a surprise. My real concerns have to do with what are the implications, not just for us here in Dominica, but for the rest of the region. And that is what I would like to ask us to sort of focus a little bit on. Because you see, although we are a region, we like to think of ourselves as one region, we behave as if we might as well, some of us be in the Pacific, some in the Indian Ocean, some in the Atlantic Ocean. We seem not to care about the safety and protection of the much valued, ethics and cultures and governance systems of our respective islands. We seem not to care what goes on. I heard you talking about the murders in St. Lucia. Dominicans don't show any real, have no reaction to that, because we don't see St. Lucia as being an intimate, close cousin.
Yeah. You're absolutely correct, Mr. Martin. So let's continue down that road for a minute or two. You've had an election campaign that has been marred by calls for reform. However, it seemed to have received limited attention or support from regional institutions, policymakers, and governments. The media was focused, but not much support from those groupings. However, immediately on the heels of the election and a winner being declared, you're seeing and hearing of congratulatory messages coming from these very institutions and governments. Is there something wrong with that approach? Is Mr. Marte on? Mr. Marte, good morning. Can you hear me? We're on live in Rosa Dominica with former government.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Excellent. So I was asking, sir, if you heard...
I heard your question.
I heard the question.
Yeah, that is much more significant than what unfolded on Tuesday here in Dominica. It is the hypocrisy, the double standards of the region's institutions and leaders. They will remain silent. In fact, they colluded in 2019 to send the regional security system forces to Dominica the night before, the day before an election. And now they have the gall, the guts to actually stand up and congratulate somebody who has openly stolen another election. And that is why we in the Caribbean cannot have any respect for leadership. No respect for governance and its institutions, because the leaders throughout the region, from Mia Motley to Ralph Gonzalez to Gaston Brown to your guy there in St. Lucia now, etc., even if they have all had the experience of being in opposition, being in the disadvantageous position, they all rush to give a claim and praise and congratulations to anybody who's won, no matter how. And so they wonder why the people of the Caribbean have so little regard and respect for their leaders. Because the leaders are behaving like gangsters. A gangster likes any other gangster and hates every police officer. And that's the behavior of our region. We fail as a result of that behavior to come together when it really matters around issues of democracy. That is why democracy is on this dying bed in the Caribbean. How can you talk to people about democracy when you actually are supporting people who are tyrannical and are unraveling what's left of the democratic process? People who are conducting elections without any attention to making sure that if I say my name is Don Lillabona, that I can verify that. You go to the bank to cash a check. In most cases, you now have to give 2 forms of identification. But to go and vote for our government in Dominica, you don't have to identify. I simply can go and say, my name is Don Lillabona, and they'll give me a ballot and send me to vote. So understand that by giving congratulations to somebody who says they win a poll like that, the other leaders and institutions in the Caribbean are basically ensuring the demise of what left of democracy. The people can have no respect for a system that they know is flawed, that they know is tainted, in the words of the Caribbean Court of Justice, who said that no elections in Dominica should be conducted under the present circumstances of the electoral system. And so here again, our leaders who accede to the authority of that court, the CCJ, are openly defying the studied opinion of that very court. So how can we be unraveling regional institutions of such importance and expect the Caribbean people and the Caribbean society to survive and grow and prosper? That is what those leaders are doing. Every single last one of them are doing that. And I go further. Here we have a situation. There's a global biodiversity conference on now going on. There was the COP27 on climate change. Those issues, do you ever wonder why the Caribbean never has been able to assemble a regional set of initiatives to look after the regional climate issues and biodiversity issues? And it is because everybody wants their own little kingdom. The people in St. Lucia want their kingdom, so don't interfere. And if you don't interfere, they will not interfere in your little kingdom. So it's tyrants supporting tyrants. I mean, we need to openly admit that. We wonder why the young people in our respective islands are engaging in such wanton violence against each other. It's because we have unraveled a picture of a Caribbean society that is good and just and kind and prosperous. What we see is that the leaders, by extension the media in the Caribbean, has perpetuated the image that we in the Caribbean, we just calypso people, all we want is some fat, some rum, we wind down the place, and somebody put some money in our pocket. We don't care where the money comes from or who put it in our pocket. That is the Caribbean. You see, it's that wanton lack of discipline, lack of focus that keeps us where we are. Look at our food reports, and our disease, chronic non-communicable diseases. Those things are wiping out segments of our population. We're eating bad food. We're importing over $4 billion worth of food annually into a region that used to export food. And the leaders have nothing to say about that. Everybody's on their own little frolic. Barbados trying to solve its problems. They're the one trying to solve its problems. But they're not realizing there's such a thing as critical mass. There's such a thing as getting to that critical point in a process whereby coming together, we would do it much better. William Dimas, Eric Williams, Norman Govan, Carl Stone, George Beckford, all these luminaries of thought that tried to teach the Caribbean that we must act as one. It is only when we do that we do best. When we had the World Championship cricket team in the West Indies, that was because we had people who understood and lived a single Caribbean focus. But today, my brother, what you have 15 members of CARICOM, you have 15 tyrants. 15 people who just want to be left alone to be their own gangsters and go and do their own thing and don't interfere with them. And that attitude has permeated through the entire society, which is why people cannot even work together.
Yeah, but
sports is dead.
Have we, Mr. Marty, as a citizenry, allowed this to happen because we become too reliant of political institutions and politicians, to be frank?
Well, we didn't just become reliant automatically. It wasn't our institutions were dismantled by those who wanted us to become more dependent on them. We had farmers' institutions. I worked in St. Lucia, St. Vincent, Grenada, Jamaica, with farmers' organizations in the 70s and 80s. And I knew how strong they were. Okay? I worked with trade unions throughout the region, from the oil field workers trade union, where I did training sessions for them many times, all the way up the islands. So I know what the region was like when we had strong institutions that were non-governmental, that were civic society institutions, community-based institutions. The politicians who came into office realized that that was a countervailing force to them, which is exactly what they were meant to be. If you don't control the authority and power in the hands of one person, because the human being is the nature of who and what he or she is, they will take more power. You give them an inch, they'll take a yard. So these civic institutions were critical to protecting and preserving democracy. So they dismantled them. They recruited the leaders of these institutions, trade unions, youth groups, women's organizations, into party politics. And so they cut the head off of these institutions that were the key to maintaining and growing our democracy. And they wonder today why people are so anti-democratic. They don't even know what the word means. It's because the politicians dismantled.
I accept that, Mr. Marty, but again it goes back to my point, and I hope I'm not pressing you too much here, but we as the citizens, we stayed silently and we allowed the politicians to dismantle all of those critical regional institutions.
Because we are all products of our environment. And while there are in each island, you can find only a small remnant of what you would call a radical revolutionary element. In each island it's there, in Grenada, in St. Vincent, Dominica, it's few of us left. We are a dying breed. because, in fact, the entire environment shifted gears away from celebrating the power of the people, although we used to say that, power to the people, but it had to be my people in my party as opposed to the people. So we worked hard to resist those things. That is what the 1970s and 80s in the Caribbean was about. It was about people in communities, at the grassroots, on the ground, recognizing that the politicians were beginning to dismantle the people's institutions, and we fought back. We stood up and we attempted to build and rebuild and strengthen our organizations, but they used the power of our own state against us from money to opportunity to redesigning and reshaping and misshaping the education system. Look at the primary and secondary school curricula that it is available to our children and grandchildren today. They don't teach them anything about it. I mentioned the names of Dimas and Govan and Beckford. People are in university today in the Caribbean and they do not know who those people are. They have no idea. They don't read their writings, so they disconnected people from their own culture, from their own society. Listen to radio stations throughout the region. All of that was part of the dismantling process. You don't hear patois. You don't hear Creole music as much as you hear pop or whatever it is, or whatever. So people are more in tune with what is going on external to the society than what's going on right on the doorstep. If you ask any 5 people in Dominica or the region today, what is the situation in the World Cup, FIFA World Cup today, they will know. But you ask them, what is the situation in St. Lucia today? How many murders? They have no idea what you're talking about.
Absolutely.
So while yes, it is true, we are the champions that have to stand up and fight and preserve our cultural, political, and social identity. Understand that the forces arrayed against us are enormous. That is what we have experienced here in Dominica. Millions of dollars of this money that are in the control of the finance minister, who happens to be the person who is the prime minister in Dominica, are used to campaign against the very people whose taxes as VAT and duties and so on pay money into the treasury. So understand that unless you have a radicalization, a radicalization of the population, we will lose it all. We haven't lost it all yet, but we're quickly losing it. And elections have become, if you will, the showcase window that is revealing to us what has happened and is continuing to happen in our society. Every time you have an election, you see big music, big crowds, shirts, t-shirts, banners, and millions of dollars being spent. But you go around the corner from the main road and you find people in rundown homes. People still living in homes without plumbing, without electricity, not far from where the big rallies are taking place, and so on. People go to hospital and the hospital doesn't have this medicine or that piece of equipment, but we have millions to pay. In our case, you have a sound trucks with big PA systems on them. And for 3 weeks of just driving around and playing music, you know what they were paid? Each one of them were paid 20,000 EC dollars. 20,000 EC dollars for 3 weeks of making noise in the head of the elderly and the infirm and the disabled people of the country. So our priorities have become distorted. But it didn't happen naturally. It's not as a result of the falling from the sky. It is individuals, politicians, businessmen who have found interest in that kind of reordering of our society, professionals, lawyers, doctors, economists, and all of us who went to university and were supposed to come back and help build our region. We became part of the destructive force of our region. So our children are wayward. They have no idea who they are. What is the history of the Caribbean? What is our connection with Grenada, St. Vincent, St. Lucia, Martinique, Guadeloupe, etc.? They have no idea. You know more about New York, Boston, Miami, Tampa, and than they know about Castries,
Yep.
than they know about
You're
Miku.
absolutely correct. And
So-
evidence of the approach to break up regional institutions which supported that sort of connectivity that you speak to is still all around us. We no longer have a regional Caribbean link up in terms of sharing of information on news developments. That used to be a big and popular thing which assisted in connecting us. I want to stay on this subject for a little while, Mr. Marte. Obviously, the change will not come with the politicians. How and where can we start to engender that sort of radical movement that you speak of?
Well, it takes me back to your family. You see, your father, Danny Labone, in every island there are a few Danleys. We have to find those Danleys. We have to find their sons like you, who appear to be following a bit in his footsteps. And we have to nurture, and we have to protect, we have to encourage, we have to invest in you. We have to invest in that new society that we want to recapture and rebuild here in the Caribbean. And we do that by being vocal in the face of attacks from those who would wish that we were silent. By being insistent upon high standards of professional ethics in all the professions, not just doctors and lawyers, but engineers, foresters, agronomists. There must be high standards. How can you have people like we have here who have been trained, have gone to university for 5, 6, 7 years, come back, they're fully professional, and they sit down and they take instructions from somebody who happens to be a minister who they refer to as honorable. But that minister has no idea about forests, and he's giving instructions.
I'm so happy that you went down that path, Mr. Marte. So, because that takes me to my next question that I'll ask quickly. Based on what you just said, have we become a region of qualified derelicts?
Of qualified what? I didn't hear that.
Of qualified derelicts? Mr. Marte is still with us? No, we'll have to connect with Mr. Marte. I'm told we'll do so momentarily. Stay with us. A very intriguing discussion. We're not focused much on the election result here in Dominica. He is of the view, and I agree, the issues now is bigger and speaks to the implications for the wider Caribbean based on the trends that we see in surrounding electoral processes and the holding of elections in the Caribbean region. So there's a bigger discussion that we're having this morning. He's a former government minister. He had responsibility for the agriculture portfolio, having previously served in the Dominica Labour Party administration. He also served under the Freedom Movement government here in Dominica as well. Athie Marte, well respected here in Dominica and across the Caribbean, very vocal and independent advocate for democracy, independent advocate for human rights, equality, and for proper governance. Anticipate a quick reconnection with Athie. If my co-producer is on, just ask Mr. Marte to reconnect with the invite, and we will bring him back shortly. Is he on back? Not as yet. Stay with us. We go up until 9. Still some time to go. Perhaps it makes sense for us to go back to Master